Okay, I'd like to say a few words about Tu Bishvat. Um, what is, first of all, Tu Bishvat? I think there's a bit of a confusion about the halachic ramifications of a day like Tu Bishvat and their meaning in our calendar, because Tu Bishvat has really gone through a transformation over the last, I would say, over the last century, probably even less than that, over the last 35 years. So, first of all, halachically, what is Tu Bishvat? So the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, Arba'a Rashi Shanim Hen. There are 4 New Years. The first of Nisan, remember in the Hebrew months, even though we count the year from Tishrei normally, but we count the months from Nisan. So the first of Nisan is called the New Year for Kings, which means when the Jewish kings write how many years they have been in power, so they always, their New Year would start from the first of Nisan, which is also the month that the Jews left Egypt. The first of Elul is called the New Year for the tithe which is taken from animals, which you calculate from Elul to Elul. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon say, no, that's also on the first of Tishrei. The first of Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah when we calculate the years, when we calculate the sabbatical year, Shemitah, when we calculate the Jubilee, the Yovel, and when we calculate planting a tree, which is a little bit confusing, and when we plant vegetables. On the first of Shvat is the new year for trees, according to Beit Shammai, and according to Beit Hillel, it's on the 15th day of Shvat. Now that's confusing. So what is the difference then between the first of Tishrei, which Jews just said when it comes to planting, that is the beginning of the year, and the 15th of Shvat, according to Beit Hillel, or the first of Shvat, according to Beit Shammai, which is called the New Year for the trees? What would that mean? So I will explain it by example. And in Jewish law, for some reason, things are always a little bit complicated. You know, there is in the Torah, there's what's called the mitzvah of Orla, which means when you plant a tree for the first 3 years, you're not allowed to partake of the fruit of that tree. And in the 4th year, it's called Rivai, which means theoretically, I take the fruit for the 4th year, I bring it to Jerusalem and eat it in purity. Today, we don't do that because of the problems with purity, etc. So we just wait another year, basically. So how is that calculated? It goes like this. If I planted that tree, let's say 44 days before the first of Tishrei, okay? Why 44 days? Because it takes a certain amount of time until the roots start growing of the tree. It's about 2 weeks. So it has to be a certain amount of time before. And the tree has to be standing at least 30 days is considered a year. So if I planted 44 days, which means it had enough time to sprout roots and it had its 30 days, so then once it hit the first of Tishrei, that would be the 2nd year for that tree. Because in planting, it has to do with the first of Tishrei. However, Tu Bishvat is called the Rosh Hashanah for the tree, which means what the tree bears, which is the fruit. Which means after the 4th year of that tree, which I calculated from the first of Tishrei, remember, because I planted it 44 days before the first of Tishrei. So 3 Tishreis later, after that first Tishrei, I would already now be in the 4th year. But I cannot partake of the fruit until Tu Bishvat, because for the fruit, Tu Bishvat is the new year. And even though for the tree, the planting of the tree, it was the first of Rosh Hashanah. Okay, if that's not technical enough, so there's this differentiation between planting and reaping. It's the same thing with the issues of what's called also masrot, of not giving the tithes from one year to another. When it comes to the fruit of the tree, we calculate from Tu Bishvat. So Tu Bishvat has its place in halacha, in Jewish law, which has to do with the fruit of the tree, and that's basically Tu Bishvat. However, Tu Bishvat is a semi-holiday in the sense that we do not say Tachanun. You're not supposed to fast on Tu Bishvat. It's considered one of those days which seems to be a semi-holiday. Now, having said that, Tu Bishvat has gone through a transformation. Now, we know that historically Ashkenazi Jews, for instance, already hundreds of years ago, had a custom to eat 15 different types of fruit on Tu Bishvat. And of course, the central stage was given to the fruits which are indigenous to the land of Israel, the 7 species, in Hebrew, Shivat Haminim, which is mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Eretz Chita, V'Sorah, V'Gefen, V'Teina, V'Rimon, Eretz Zeit Shemen Udvash, right? The wheat and the barley are the first two, and then a geffen, which is either grapes or wine, and then figs and pomegranates and olives and olive oil, and dates, which give date honey or silan. These were the 7 indigenous fruits of the land of Israel, according to the Torah in Devarim. However, in the 17th century, influenced by Lurianic Kabbalah, there was a book called Chemdat Yamim that came out with what we call today the Seder Tu Bishvat, which we use in the Tel Aviv synagogue every year, the Seder Tu Bishvat, and probably will be done online on this Wednesday night on Tu Bishvat. The Seder Tu Bishvat, which has sort of dubious Kabbalistic origins, some say it actually comes from Natan Azati, who was involved in he was actually the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi, the Sabbatian movement. However, you might say that Tu Bishvat is Tu Bishvat, and whatever other things he might have been involved in, so anyhow, so this Chemdat Yamim, which was possibly influenced by him, is the first to talk about the Seder Tu Bishvat, where you eat 3 different types of fruit, and you also have 4 cups of wine representing. So the fruit represent 3 worlds, and the cups of wine represent seasons, etc. Why did Tu Bishvat become what it came? And is something which is artificially manufactured? Or is there something really intrinsically interesting about Tu Bishvat that it deserved to get such attention in the modern Jewish world? Because the Seder Tu Bishvats have taken off in Israel, I would say, dramatically, even among certain Jews outside of Israel too. Among Sephardim already, I would say it's even before the State of Israel, but I would say after the State of Israel really took off in a greater way, and specifically in the last 30 to 40 years. Let's say 40 years. So in order to understand this, I want to first go back to our Mishnah, which I quoted before from Rosh Hashanah. Now the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says there are 4 new years. What are the 4 new years? Let's look again. The first one is the new year for kings. Now, of course, a king is a person, okay? It's a human being. And here we're referring to Jewish kings, because we can't tell the non-Jewish kings when to start their new years. But we can tell the Jewish king, you have to start from the 1st of Nisan. And remember, the 1st of Nisan, or Passover, which is the 15th, is also the birth of the Jewish people. So it's the king, and really the Jewish people, but it's the king who represents the people in this context. Then we said the 1st of Elul, which is the majority opinion, is the beginning of the year to calculate the tithes from animals which were given to the temple and usually redeemed. And the 1st of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for calculating things that have to do with the land, like the sabbatical year, and also calculating the time, right? And then, and also planting in the land. So it's really space and time. And then the 1st of Shvat, according to Beit Shammai, and the 15th of Shvat, which is the Halacha, according to Beit Hillel, for the trees. So if you notice here, we have really a relationship here to the 4, what we call the 4 levels of nature, which is mentioned actually in Aristotelian physics, but I guess is also something obvious, which is the human being, which is the highest level. That's called the king of Israel. Then you have the animals. Then you have the trees. And then you have earth, because it's what you plant in the earth, right? The first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for what you plant in the earth, whether it's a tree and whether it's vegetables, the things that you plant in the earth. And it's also for calculating the year, so it's space-time. But if we do it according to this pattern, so you have basically the domem, which is the what we call inorganic matter, which is the earth or rocks and earth, basically. And then you have vegetation, and then you have animals, and then you have man. These were domem, tzomech, chaim, and daber. These were considered the four levels already in Aristotelian thinking of how nature was seen as a sort of development from one stage to another. So in this sense, the four Rosh Hashanahs represent these four levels: the minerals, vegetation, animals, and mankind, represented by the king, the Rosh Hashanah for the kings. Having said that, then, the closest relationship, we have a relationship with trees, because in vegetation, they are specifically what's mentioned. Now, why specifically trees? We actually find in the Tanakh that there is an interesting parallel between human beings and trees, and let me give you just a few citations to realize this. For instance, Tzaddik, it says in Tehillim 92:13, a righteous man blossoms like a palm branch, like a cedar in Lebanon he shall shoot out, and even be wise in older days. So the righteous person is like the palm branch, like the tamar. Here's another one, Tehillim, first chapter, first sentence. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach b'atzat rishayim. Happy is the man who did not go after the advice of the evil ones. This person will be ke'etz shatul al pagaimaim. They will be like a tree which is planted in water, which gives its blossoming fruit in the right time and will never wither. So again, the man who doesn't go after the evil is like a tree sitting in water. Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 7 and 8. Baruch hagever sheyiftach b'Hashem. Blessed is the man who puts his trust in God, and God is his confidant. And he will be like a tree which is planted in water and sending his roots, and will never be afraid, will never have fear of the heat, and will always be fresh even in the time of the famine, and will always produce fruit. Here's another one, Isaiah 65. My people lives a long time like the life of the tree. Okay. Here's the most famous one. The Devarim, chapter 20, verse 19. When you shall make a siege over a city during battle, and you want to overcome the city, do not destroy the trees. Don't use their axe to chop them, because you eat from these trees. For is a man a tree that you have to fight him in the siege? So basically the Torah is saying, don't chop the fruit trees. If you need a tree, use the ones who do not bear fruit, because your battle is not against the trees, it's against the people. However, the Midrash already said, Ki Adam Eitz HaSadeh. And Menachem Rekanati brings this also in his Parish on the Torah. There seems to be a parallel between man and tree. And a lot of the Parshanim notice this. And of course, one that you probably didn't notice, but it's the most obvious. Adam and Eve, as soon as they are created, they are placed in a garden. And these two human beings are informed that there are two trees in that garden. Two human beings and two trees. And one of the trees they can eat from, it appears, because there's no prohibition, it's called the tree of life. It doesn't actually say to eat from it, but there's absolutely no prohibition. And the other one, it says not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because the day that you eat from that tree, you shall surely die. So you have Adam and Eve and two trees. There are other trees, by the way, and they're told that they can eat from the other trees. And in fact, in this whole garden, only trees are mentioned. It's Adam, Eve, and the trees. Something's going on here. What does that all mean? In order to explain this, by the way, the two trees, if you take the word eitz in Hebrew, which is a term used for trees, even though sometimes it's also the term ilan, is used later on in rabbinic writings, but most of the time eitz is used in the Torah. The word eitz actually is like the same Hebrew word for eitzah, which means advice. So the two trees become two types of advice. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then there's the tree of life. The Torah, of course, in Devarim says, "Ubacharta b'chayim," you should choose life. But I don't want to go into that because that's much more involved, understanding the Garden of Eden story. But I want to point this out. It's been noticed many times that in Genesis and Bereshit, there are two creation stories. You have the general creation story, which man is part of, which is Genesis 1. And then you have the focused story just on Adam and Eve in the garden, which is 2. Okay? So 2 is really focused more on Adam and Eve and what happens with them in the garden. And 1 is just creation of man alongside with the rest of creation. But even in creation, in chapter 1 of creation, you can see that there are 2 stories going on. Let me explain. The stories go like this. Each story, days 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 are 2 different stories. For instance, day 1, there's light. Okay? God creates light on day 1. Day 2, there is a firmament between the upper waters and the lower waters, and then earth and the seas. And then day 3 is vegetation and trees. Now watch what happens from day 4. We start all over again. Again, there's light. But this time the light is the luminary bodies, the sun, moon, and the stars. Day 5 parallels, so day 4 parallels day 1. Day 1 there was light. Day 4 there's light, luminary bodies. Day 5 parallels day 2. On day 2, God created a firmament between the upper and lower waters. On day 5, God creates the birds in the heaven, the fish in the waters. Then, day 6 parallels day 3, because in day 3, God created the grass the bushes, and the trees. And on day 6, God creates the creepy crawling animals, the ones that go through the grass, the medium-sized animals, which are like the size of the bushes, and then Adam and Eve, which are like the size, are like trees, the only ones that stand up totally erect. So there's something fishy going on in this story. There seems to be a double story of 2 levels of the creation story of Genesis. Light, firmament, upper waters, lower waters, and then 3 levels of vegetation, grass, bushes, trees. And then again, day 5, light, sun, moon, stars, upper and lower, the birds and the fish, which are, well, the fish are cold-blooded animals, but I mean they're considered on a lower level. And then on day 6, the rest of the animals and Adam and Eve. And the rest of animals are the creepy crawling, the middle-sized animals, Adam and Eve, which seem to parallel day 3 of the grass, the bushes, and the trees. So what is this? It's 2 parts to the world, and I want to say this in a short version because I don't like these talks going too long. There are two ways to look at our universe. One is from a physical point of view, an organic point of view, physical and organic point of view. And the physical and the organic point of view are basically the first two steps of creation, which is called minerals and vegetation. And minerals and vegetation are the two parts of life that have no consciousness at all. And therefore, in Aristotelian thinking, they also had no anima, they had no soul. Kabbalistic thinking sees it a little bit different, like maybe a little bit more like Buddhistic understanding that the life force is a gradual life force, but in the sense of nefesh, yes, you have nefesh in animals, but not exactly in vegetation. Are plants aware? That's an interesting question. Probably not. Do they react? Yes. If you put a plant in the wrong direction of the sunlight, it will move towards the sunlight. So it does react, in a sense, towards its basic needs, which is water and sunlight. Is that a conscious decision? Not clear. Even though some people swear that when they put their plants next to the telephone and they talk to the plants, it helps. Maybe, I really don't know. Does it help because plants are conscious of that? As far as we know, no, but who knows? Animals seem to have a certain level of consciousness. Not like human beings. They don't seem to understand time the way we do, but they do know how to, save themselves from pain and look for their prey and for their food and do some very intelligent things also to get it. So there seems to be a certain amount of awareness, possibly even emotions, even though there were those who thought not. I think Voltaire didn't think animals had emotions, but it appears that they do. And that's why a lot of human beings can connect very well with cats, with dogs, with all different types of animals, horses, etc., on the emotional level, because animals seem to share a certain amount of emotion. So the first half of creation, days 1, 2, and 3, at least in this simple level, seems to be the lower sense of non-organic and organic life, of mineral and vegetative life. It's the second level which is much more complicated, the level which has various levels of consciousness, whether it's an emotional consciousness on the level of the animals or an intellectual consciousness on the level of human beings. And what happens is on Tu Bishvat, which is Rosh Hashanah for the trees, we are coming now in parallel with the king of days 1, 2, 3. So the ultimate being of creation from day 6, the human being, parallels the highest being of days 1, 2, and 3, which is the tree. But the tree is also our lower level. Now, there's a lot we can get out of the tree when we connect to it. By connecting to the ground, by connecting to vegetation, it gives us strength. There's nothing, vegetables have a way of helping people, I would say, what's the term? Sort of a restart their system. They can clean the system, vegetables specifically, fruit to a certain extent, but vegetables even more, fruit because of the fiber. Fruit also have the glucose and the energy, but there's something about vegetables, there's something about the ground, there's something about the connection to the ground and to nature, which is a strengthening factor for human beings because it's part of us. Because when we live too much in our conscious world, which today has become not just a conscious world, but a virtual world, and we separate ourselves from nature, we lose a little bit of that power. So the king of day 6 and the king of day 3 have a certain parallel as far as the levels of creation. So yes, we live in the higher level, but we also need, as long as we're in this physical world, we need that connection to that lower level too, which is days 1 to 3. And yeah, I wanted to say this a little bit in a nutshell, some of my thoughts of this idea of the relationship between trees and man. And I'll end off by saying when Moses sent the spies into the land of Israel in Parshat Shlach, which is the parsha we're about to read, And he says to them, I want you to check out the cities, whether they're fortified or not. And I want you to check out the country. Hayesh ba'etz im ein. Does it have a tree or not? And Rashi brings the midrash. When even does it have a tree? How can it not have a tree? It probably has many trees. So the midrash says, no. Does it have a saintly person who, by their merit, they will be able to win the war? So again, this idea of a tree being a saintly person. So this comparison between the person and the tree is when you look at the creation story in those two parts, you can see the parallel. And why would a tree be saintly? Because a tree does what it has to do and never makes mistakes on purpose. But human beings, even though we can excel the tree and do much better, but we can also make mistakes on purpose, which means that we can be less than the tree. So that the righteous person, when they choose good, in a sense, they're like the tree. They're fulfilling their level by taking the right decision, but they can be worse than the tree. So sometimes that's maybe one of the meanings of the righteous person is like the tree. Shalom, shalom.